don't think risk should be feared. They are the drivers of our evolution as humans because we have risks that we evolve, that we change. And I think that there's no way you can get any rewards without taking risks.
How do you see AI impacting the finance sector in the next 12 months?
And the concept of effective challenge. It's essentially having someone next to you when you think too fast will be thinking slower. Having a partner, somebody who says, hold on, we're about to make a mistake.
Pierre, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I was looking forward to our recording today. And I'm excited that we could finally get this together. So just starting a little bit with our audience, I'd love for you to tell them a bit about Pierre, your upbringing, how you came about to be the person that you are today.
Thank you very much, Gary. But before I start with this, I want to thank you so much and for giving me this opportunity. It's the first time I do a podcast, and doing it with you is a great experience. So I enjoyed this, and I watched your podcasts, and they're really informative. So again, thank you very much for having me. One little thing, Gary, is that the opinions I may express in this podcast are mine and not that of SG. But you know. So that's normal. My life, I was born and raised in Quebec, and I'm a very proud father of two teenagers, and I come from a family of artists, which is pretty far from banking. So nobody around me understands exactly what I do, but it's been a very interesting journey for me. And quite a learning curve. I know you like words. I love words. And learning curve is a beautiful word because, there's nothing linear in learning curve.
It's true.
I started my career as an attorney. I'm mostly in business. I was not very good. I was not a good attorney. It's something that, even though I love words and I love to read and I read extensively all my life, I found that I was much better at negotiating and dealing with people versus drafting things. So I moved to banking at one point, and it was a long journey for me.
And Pierre, it's funny because you may say you were not a good attorney, but you started with a disclaimer from the get-go on this.
I learned fast, I guess.
And if you think about attorneys as they advance in their career, a lot of what makes them really good is actually the negotiation part and sort of the tactical work. And the drafting, they can have other colleagues do once the real terms are in place. So you were just further ahead with your skill set for your career.
I wouldn't say that, Gary.
And yeah, I can appreciate growing up in a family of artists is a very, very different background than what you ended up with. Growing up, who would you think had the biggest influence on you? And could be family, could be sort of external colleagues or mentors, etc. And if you need to have more than one, no problem.
Yeah, I guess there are several around. In a life, you have several people who influence your life. Obviously, growing up with a single mother, my mother had a key role in my life, right? She really kind of pushed for our education and allowed me to get to where I am today. But along the way, I met many friends, many colleagues, and people who had a huge influence on my life. One of them was a chief risk officer in a bank where I worked here in Montreal, and he approached the job in such a way that he made it very interesting. And it became something that I said, okay, let's try that one day.
Yeah, and that's often how we end up in. And I asked that question, Pierre, because sometimes people wonder how we end up in the paths that we do, especially if they are paths that are relatively unique, and that's a perfect example. I don't think I've had a traditional risk officer on the podcast in the past, and we've had all kinds of executives who very much like you, their opinions are of their own and not of their organizations.
Yeah.
And sometimes people wonder, how do you end up in a path that is Yeah, perhaps when you hear lawyer, for example, there's a lot more lawyers out there than maybe risk officers per se on average. So that to people is something they wonder, how do you end up in something like that? Um, what would be one achievement that you're particularly proud of in your career, Pierre?
The first one I would say, Gary, is that I'm very proud to being a banker. I'm extremely honored to be one. I think, being a banker has an importance for our society. We have a pretty bad reputation in a certain way, right? I mean, we've made mistake as a profession. But we play an important role. We take your mother, my mother, people's savings, and we redeploy this capital to make businesses grow and flourish and hopefully improve the situation for our entire society. And I think I take this role very seriously, and I'm very proud of participating in this process. Right. So I think that's the first thing I would tell you. The second one is I was pretty lucky. It's something I looked for when I was a kid. I grew up in a school where all my colleagues were coming from all over the world, and I didn't have the means to travel. And I promised myself that in my career I would explore the world, and I was able to essentially kind of work in 3 different countries: Canada, the U.S., and France, over the last 30 years. And I think this has brought a lot to me about learning about myself first and foremost, because when you work abroad, it's different than when you travel in tourism. You're discovering a lot more about yourself than you're discovering about others, what you like, what you don't like, and what you tolerate and don't tolerate. But I think it's been a fantastic journey. And Société Générale has been a really great employer, allowing me to go through this journey and to evolve in different dimensions and jurisdictions and so on and so forth.
No, and it's certainly been a great platform, Pierre, to do that. So that's and to your point, sometimes the being with the right organization can make a huge difference. Now, naturally, this type of path requires a lot of vision, dedication, hard work, but it's seldom done alone. So, who do you think, what people and sort of any ingredients particularly that helped you go through this journey? Because I can imagine banking hours are not a typical 9 to 5 a lot of the time. Leaving commute aside, just before we started, we were talking about lengthy New York commutes alone. So what led to that success? And obviously, you had to go in different countries, deal with different cultures, etc. It requires an adjustment where requires personal family adjustment as well as business adjustment. So what were the ingredients that led to your success there?
I don't know if I'm going to answer the way you would expect me to answer, Gary, but I'm going to say my mistakes. I made
We all
so many
learn.
mistakes. I made so many mistakes along the way. They were great. They allowed me to kind of evolve, to learn, to kind of adjust. And the mistakes along the way were so numerous, I don't count them anymore. I picked jobs initially where I was going for the glamour, right? Working on the trading desk. And you say, wow, in a bank, why would you not work on the trading desk, right? You have all these screens. You're the master of the universe, as they say in the movies, right? And then you realize, oh no, it's not for me. That's not me, right? And so you kind of you make these mistakes, you progress, and that defines your career and your skill set, and now you kind of get better at things. And the second thing would say the friends that I made along the way. You don't pick a job, you pick the people you're going to work with, and as long as you pick the right people along this journey, you're going to have a good time. You're going to progress. You're going to learn. They're going to challenge you, and we'll get back to this later. They will challenge you for the right reasons, and then you're gonna get better and you're gonna evolve. That's I think in my career I would say these are the two things: my mistakes and my friends, and the fact that my friends tolerated my mistakes are probably the best things.
Well, and Pierre, I think that's a very important point to highlight because people are often worried, oh, I took this job at the trading desk. I feel like I wasted some time versus focusing on X part of the career. And they don't see it as an important ingredient of their advancement. That one, by doing that, certainly there would have been a level of learning that came from it. But two, they realize that this is not what I wanted to do. And it was important to do it because I learned that this wasn't what I wanted to do. And it can't be seen as something where it was just a waste, because you never adjust to who you are far more fulfilled with unless you go through that journey.
I completely agree with you.
Now, you have spent most of your career in risk management functions, Pierre. So these are, again, we talked about sort of how people end up in unique roles. And again, risk management tends to be a smaller portion of the demographic focusing on professional demographic focusing on that space. And we often think of risk as something scary and to always worry and mitigate, etc. But when you're the risk officer, inevitably, that's always the sort of top of mind and what you're dealing with day in, day out. So tell me what you think of that and how you managed it along the way.
So you're getting into a question, Gary, that is the passion of my life, right? It's like, I like that stuff so much that, I hope that I'm not going to bore you, but I mean, we're going to go through a journey, you and I, if you allow me, right? But first of all, I don't think risk should be feared, right? They are the drivers of our evolution as humans. This is because we have risks that we evolve, that we change. And I think that there's no way you can get any rewards without taking risks. That doesn't exist, right? And because of that, I would say that the risks, however, they need to be properly managed. But that's different. It's not about fear. It's about like addressing them and managing them properly. Now, our human brain, when you think about it, right, humans are extremely incredible. Our human brain is designed to manage risks like all the time, every second of our lives, right? When you brush your teeth, you're managing risk. When you kind of cross the street, think about all the risks that you're managing, thinking about the lights, the cars, the sidewalk, the holes, everything, right? We manage risk like continuously, everything we do. When I speak with you right now, I'm managing the risks of my image, of what I'm saying, of all sorts of things, right? So we do that constantly, and we do it without thinking, and that's pretty interesting. So now, Gary, let me ask you a question, okay? If you may, it's Friday afternoon, Friday morning, sorry. It's a beautiful day outside, and I'm about to start my vacations. So you and I, why don't we go skydiving? You want to go skydiving with me?
I'd love to go skydiving. I'm not sure my insurance policy allows it, Pierre, but
Okay.
I'd love to go skydiving.
Do you perceive skydiving as being a risky endeavor? Yeah.
It's one of the riskiest you would do from which is why I think insurance policy is often excluded as coverage.
Now, it's interesting because, by the way, skydiving is such also a beautiful word. In French, it's parachutisme. It doesn't have the same kind of, I would say, romantic, poetic knowledge, right? Skydiving, it's kind of something pretty nice. I'm saying this because you like words and you like translations, and it's kind of interesting. Let's analyze this question, you and I, if you want, right? I mean, and the science of risk management, and what I've learned from, 30 years of 30 years in my career, and from the regulators as well, is the first thing that you need to do is identify what you call identify the risks, right? When we analyze this question of skydiving, what are the risks? And then we need to talk about what we would say is the risk tolerance. Okay, so we can identify the risk on one side, and then we can set our tolerance for these risks on the other.
That's right.
So if I tell you that for the risk identification, so what are the risks of skydiving? We would say, first of all, maybe the plane could go down, right? It's not about just jumping. You just go in the plane, so maybe there could be a malfunction with the plane. It's about the parachute not deploying. It's about breaking a leg. There are so many different risks, right? But we can list them we can start analyzing them and say, okay, can we measure them? Right? Can we measure these risks? What is the likelihood of an incident happening there? And then we can have a discussion, you and I, about, are we okay with these risks? What's our tolerance, right? What is our appetite to take these risks? So in terms of the risk identification, just to tell you that, you know how many people died from skydiving last year in the United States? 9.
I imagine this 9. Okay.
9. And
Okay. That's not
2024.
yeah.
As
That's
a matter
not
of fact,
insane.
right? If you ask ChatGPT, right? I mean, it's like, you know, now AI is telling us everything about everything. It's a lot less risky to jump off a plane than it is to drive a car, because people will manage the risks much better when they jump off a plane than when they drive a car. And so at the end of the day, you have less risks usually going there than just driving. But our brain is addicted to learning about risks. We want to identify risk as a human species. And it's so obvious that, you know, how many times do you look at your phone just to read the news? And the news are about understanding the risks out there. And we vote for politicians who are like telling us that they understand the risks and they can manage them better than anybody else. And they often focus on the risks, not the reward, right? But the risks. The human brain, we crave to understand risks because we feel we're going to manage them better. It's quite fascinating, but we often don't talk about the risk tolerance. What are we prepared to do, and how we're prepared to evolve? Now, our brain has limitations, Gary, in the sense that we tend to misjudge at times because we tend to think fast and not slow enough. We tend to misjudge the risk, right? And our brain was designed in such a way that it's very efficient, but it makes mistake. That was very much like analyzed by Kahneman and diverse psychologists. Okay, and Kahneman won the Nobel Prize, and they analyzed. They came up with I think it's 7 to 9 heuristics. So they're heuristic biases of our brain that shows that, you know, we tend to, for example, misjudge statistics. If I ask you, you know, I throw a dice about 10 times and I got 6 times 6. The number 6, 9 times out of 10. What are the chances that I'm going to get 6 the 10th time I throw the dice? People will say less in general.
Absolutely.
Because they will judge that the fact that I got the 6 9 times, then the likelihood of me getting the 6th the 10th time is lower.
Yeah.
But there's not a sample big enough to judge. I have exactly the same probability that I had the first time I threw the dice. It's like if I had 20,000 samples, I would probably have every number came out at the same probability, right? But our brain will dictate a different mindset, right? So this is an example of a heuristic. And we need to be careful about this. We need to be careful about these biases. And the biases also exist at the establishment of the risk tolerance. So, for example, when I asked you about skydiving, you talked to me about your insurance and different things. But if I'm in a meeting and I talk to people about risk tolerance and I ask someone, is this risky to make this loan? And I have 10 people around the room, I'm going to have all sorts of answers. They're going to be a function of, let's go back to skydiving. If you have kids, your tolerance for risk may be different if you don't have kids and you don't have kids. You project yourself as an adventurer, your ego, right? If you want to project yourself in a certain way, your risk tolerance is going to change. You have good knees or bad knees.
That's right.
Maybe you're not physically in shape. There are so many external exogenous circumstances that will influence your risk tolerance, your risk appetite, that if you don't talk about these things, the judgment is going to be very different. And so that also needs to be understood when you start managing risks. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense, Pierre. And I think and you can imagine every business context, et cetera, the various considerations. But also what's interesting about what you bring up is that while people make decisions, if they were not looking at sufficient data, you could have pretty faulty decision-making. It was based on their gut and strictly on their sort of just opinions of 10 people around the table. So I can only imagine your role being, okay, let me provide you sufficient data so that we can minimize your biases as you make this decision as objectively as possible.
That's absolutely right, Gary. This is exactly what the point I wanted to discuss with you is that if you take certain, and that's the difference I would say between adventure and business. Okay, if you take, for example, the climbers on Everest at the beginning, they were two buddies like trying to go up, right, with their like axes and stuff and going up Everest, right, and they were taking big chances and they were dying. At one point in the 1990s, commercial expeditions started, and they were using the same approach at the beginning of, going up with the leaders being former adventurers, and they were like bringing 20 people with them and saying, "Let's go up. We're gonna have fun," right? And that led to major disasters where, the guys in their businesses were killing themselves and killing their clients. And so in terms of business model, it's not working very well. You agree, when you start killing yourself and killing your clients, you don't make that much money. And I don't think it's a good business endeavor.
That's right.
And so they decided to start managing the risks much better. And today, if you observe the climbers on Everest, they measure everything. They measure your heart rate, they measure your oxygen, they measure the pace at which you work, they measure the weather, they measure seismic activity on the mountain, they measure everything to manage the risks, right? It's about measurement. And the leader is sitting in the base camp, observing all of these data. And you've seen the pictures today of a lot of people lining up on Everest. The number of people dying is going down compared to the climbers, clearly. And it's a commercial success. It's no longer an adventure. It's a commercial success, right? Now, we're in business, you and I. We're in the business of managing the risks because we want the commercial success. So we need to measure things. Yeah, I agree with you. So it's a little bit same thing with Formula One to a certain extent today, right? You watch poor people while, driving Formula One cars. They measure every single thing. I don't know how many things they're measuring on the cars, on the driver, and it's about like winning because it's a money business.
For sure. No, and that's a really good anecdote, Pierre, because, any amateur looking at the F1 racers, it's like, how are these people not dying on every race? Because, I mean, a mistake there, even a tiny mistake, can be fatal. And if it wasn't for this measurement and this consistent training, etc., you would have had very different results. But I think it's no different in business, that we incrementally get better as we iterate and learn from the various things we do. And that's ultimately, those consistent measurements, to your point, is what leads us to success. So it's a good way to break down a risk roll in a way that is more, that's less ominous to people, Pierre. Now, your role has evolved, and now you're CEO, which it's a different skill set, a different approach to leadership. You still have to manage risks, but you don't have to be. That's not solely the only thing you have to worry about. So how has that changed, and how is this different now than during your CRO role?
I will tell you, Gary, that I do not approach necessarily, especially when it comes to risk management, my job differently as a CEO than I did as a CRO. And the reason, one of the reasons is there's a lesson that I learned. And again, it's interesting because it's prescribed by the regulators in the United States. Okay. And it's prescribed by the regulators pretty much around the world today, is that the bias that we were talking about in the human brain when it comes to risk management, okay, can also be managed very effectively with one very simple solution. And the concept of effective challenge. It's essentially having someone next to you who, when you think too fast, will be thinking slower. Having a partner, somebody who says, Gary, hold on, we're about to make a mistake. Don't we want that next to us all the time? To have a trusted partner who essentially is like there to say, oh, watch out. You have not been thinking about this.
We certainly...
Yeah, we need that, right? All of us, we need that. And welcoming the challenge, welcoming the effective challenge, and having and that's a concept. The reason the regulators in the financial industry came up with the concept of the fourth line of defense. First line of defense is the business. Second line of defense is risk. Third line is the internal audit. is because they wanted to foster this culture of internal challenge. Okay, and the internal challenge to prevent mistakes, avoid making mistakes. So they say having somebody who thinks slower. Now,
That's right.
the difficulty in this exercise is that people tend to, we love as humans to go and simplify things and do role playing. So you're going to say the CEO is there to do the business, and the CRO is just there to manage the risks. And so we're going to role play, right? But life is more complex than this. We should want the same thing, which is the success of the firm. We're there to challenge each other constructively so that we avoid making mistakes. The CRO can make mistakes. It's just not about not taking risks and just being biased on one side. And the CEO can make mistakes. So as a CEO, I'm welcoming the challenge. And as a CRO, I was welcoming the challenge. And I understand. And for me, it's about, that's how you evolve. And think about this, right? We have all sorts of systems. And what I'm going to say, Gary, please just take in with a grain of salt. It's very personal. Look at our society today. We often have political systems that are designed to create an effective challenge, but are going in wrong directions because they don't focus on the ultimate goal. They focus on just role playing, who's winning, who's losing, versus thinking about something bigger. And think also about leaders who don't welcome the challenge. When you know that challenge is a way to kind of get better and evolve and learn and avoid biases.
Absolutely.
So for me, challenge is about growing, and it's a risk management lesson. And I think it's something that everybody should welcome. It's a philosophy of life.
Well, and I think without consistent challenges and evolution, no organization or individual will evolve. So I think if we don't push ourselves, the status quo seldom gets us a lot of success.
Yeah. Now, the difficulty with challenge, Gary, is that it generates tons of emotions.
Of course.
When you start challenging each other, I mean, we all kind of react all sorts of ways, and we challenge. And when we get upset and we start being all stressed out. So risk management is also about learning to manage emotions. Is that if I challenge you, I should expect you to be emotional to a certain way, to hit back at me, right? And if I don't manage this properly, right? If I don't manage this properly, then it's not going to work. And we're not very well trained at doing this. And this is personally where I failed the most, right? Is managing my own emotions, managing the emotions of a situation. This is very complex. This is very difficult.
It is. It is indeed. And it's something that we get better at with time, but it requires a lot of self-control, which doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't. And sometimes self-control goes up and down based on all sorts of circumstances.
Pierre, I'm pivoting a little bit in terms of some predictions of what you see in the marketplace. And now you spent 30 years, and I asked you a lot of questions about risk, so I'm going to pivot more a bit, some predictions around AI and future leaders. With your 30 years in finance, and you've been in Montreal, you've been in Paris, you've been in New York, how do you see, if you were to predict, how do you see AI impacting the finance sector in the next 12 months? And I say next 12 months because things are evolving so rapidly that to say 10 years down the road, it's a little harder to wrap your mind around it these days.
AI is going to hit our industry fast and in a very significant way. At the end of the day, a bank like mine is the cost structure is 90% people. So the more efficient we are at managing that cost, right? And AI is one solution, one clear solution. The more efficient, the more competitive we become. So the incentives to change and evolve are huge, right? So we started at SG, right? We introduced AI, namely for client services, interactions with clients, chat and conversations with clients. We also introduced AI. We're in the process of introducing AI in all sorts of other processes that we have, right? For example, know your client processes and so on and so forth. I would say it's gonna be very impactful. And the other thing is, but as a risk manager, I will tell you these are models. We need to
Of
understand
course.
these models. We need to understand the risks associated with these models. And that, I think the regulators will be very keen in making sure that we understand that. And that may slow the pace down as well, right? Because these models are based on historical data, which introduces biases. So again, it's very important that we focus. But I know Alexa is translation is very ahead of the game when it comes to AI in your field. You're in front of everybody, I think, and you have great solutions. And so I think it offers a great upside, but we have to manage it properly.
Without going on a tangent, Pierre, talking about risk management, what made us go into AI machine translation technology when we did the acquisition back in 2018 was that we saw things changing rapidly, and we said, if we don't go into AI translation technology early enough, we may not have a business one day. So the motivation was very much for risk management.
Absolutely, it's all about risk and evolution and adapting to change. Yeah.
So on that note, for the generation currently starting their careers, what skill or quality will the CEOs of tomorrow need to develop, Pierre? Like if you were to say or give advice to young leaders or people in university, etc., what should they work on? What should they balance to learn to be sort of better leaders for tomorrow, better executives for tomorrow?
I will tell you that number one is with the progress of medicine, I think people will end up living a lot longer than they used to, which is a good thing. It's an excellent thing, which means that the first thing you need to do is manage time, because you're going to have a much longer career, and you need to be, you need to think about that, right? It's going to last longer. So if it's going to last longer, it means that you need to be, you don't want to become bored at any point or time, right? So, and to avoid doing this is about versatility, adaptability. It's about learning new skills. It's by growing continuously and not, staying in place. And the second thing is I'm going to go back to what we were discussing, is welcome the challenge in your life. As a CEO, as a future leader, welcome challenge, embrace challenge, because that's all you're going to learn and evolve, and take risks, and make mistakes. That's all you're going to get better.
Well, as long as they're measured, Pierre, then we learn the right way and we evolve the right way. So I think everything you suggest is about assessing and taking. Naturally, you need to take some risks to advance, but as long as you measure them and you progress incrementally, then it's worth it. Now, Pierre, I'm going to move to a portion of our podcast that we call the rapid fire questions. And so this is just first word that comes to mind. The answers are rather quick. So the first one, how many languages do you speak?
French and English.
Excellent. What word do you hate, if any?
10. Your question is interesting because people may react to the sound of words. They may react to the image that a word will project, or they may react to the meaning of a word. And I don't like pretend because of its meaning, not the sound or the image, but the meaning is that I don't like when people pretend.
100%.
I don't like to pretend myself.
Definitely. And what word do you have a hard time pronouncing, if any?
So I had to write down the word because I mispronounce it all the time. It's flabbergasted, because I tend to invert the G and the B. So I go flag, like the flag, and then versus the B. I don't, but it's a beautiful word. But flabbergasted, yes. I need to focus every time.
I think this is an affliction, Pierre, that multilingual people have to deal with it probably a bit more than unilingual people, because naturally our brains are wired a little differently, and so I have my share of words I don't pronounce properly. So. What is your favorite word in another language, if any?
My favorite word is yes. And I thought it would be provocative as a CRO that the CRO loves the word yes.
That is true. It would be an unusual word for a CRO. And what's one word to describe yourself by?
So I'm not good at that, Gary. I knew you were going to ask me that question. So I ran a survey. And I was hoping that the people around me would come up with like words that I have, things that I'd like to be, right? Maverick, adventurous, daredevil. This is another beautiful word. But I asked my kids, and they were not even mean. I asked my wife, And then I even asked my HR department, and they all came up with something very similar, and they said reliable. So I'm going to go with that word.
Well, it's a great asset for a leader to be reliable, Pierre, and certainly for a former CRO, reliable.
Yeah,
Everyone was
I guess
a reliable CRO. No, Pierre, it's been a lot of fun having you on the podcast today. I appreciate you joining me, and it's I had to skip some of the questions that I wanted to ask for you because, as a function of time, I inevitably always go into some tangents, but certainly some that I really enjoyed. But I appreciate you joining me here today. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you very much, Gary. It was really an honor to do this with you and to do it for the first time, and it was a really great experience. Thank you so much.